I was staring down at my notebook, my pencil hovering over the page as I tried to make sense of the Spanish lesson. The words weren't coming out the way I wanted, and it was frustrating. It felt like the whole language was just slipping through my fingers, like sand in an hourglass. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't hold on to it. "You're doing it wrong." Liam's voice was soft, but tinged with a bit of exasperation. I looked up to find him standing over me, his brown eyes bright with focus, as he pointed at the page in my notebook. His messy brown hair fell over his forehead as he leaned closer, and for a second, I forgot what I was doing. "I'm not fluent," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Rolling my R's is a struggle. Spanish is not my thing." Liam let out a soft sigh, but I could see his lips twitching like he was trying not to smile. "It's not that hard, Lucas. Try again." He leaned in just a little bit closer, and I caught the faintest smell of cinnamon, something warm and comforting that made my heart skip a beat. I gave it another shot, fumbling my way through the word, trying my best to get it right. Liam let out a laugh. Not the polite chuckle I'd gotten used to hearing from him at school, but an actual laugh. It was warm and genuine, and it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. "Better," he said, shaking his head, but there was this fond look in his eyes, like he was amused and not quite sure what to do with me. "But we're going to need a lot more practice." I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. "You're the genius. I'm just here to soak it all in." Liam gave me this look, half shy and half amused, and I couldn't help but feel my face heat up. It was crazy how someone could be so quiet and yet hold so much power, as if his presence alone could make the world slow down a little. When Liam spoke, it felt like he was letting me in on a secret no one else got to hear. "Let's try something easier," he said, his golden brown eyes flicking to the notebook. "How about me, Lucas? Can you handle that?" I grinned. "You think I can't handle that? Watch this." I said it, throwing in an exaggerated roll of my R's just to make him laugh again. Liam burst into laughter, shaking his head, though I caught the softening of his smile. "You're hopeless," he said, though it wasn't mean, just playful, but I guess you're getting it. As I stared at his smile, I realized I could mess up every Spanish word in the dictionary if it meant seeing that look again. "Guess this means you like me now, huh?" I teased, trying to keep it light, though the fluttering in my chest made my voice feel a little unsteady. Liam rolled his eyes, but his cheeks flushed slightly, and I knew I was totally screwed. The first time I'd seen Liam, I didn't even know his name. My legs felt like jelly after practice, and I was just trying to make it out of the gym when, bam, I collided with something solid. Something way more solid than I was expecting, and it hurt, honestly. "Hey, watch where you're—" I started, ready to chew the guy out, but then I saw him. Liam had this look on his face, like he hadn't meant to bump into me, his golden brown eyes wide with surprise, maybe a little guilty. His face was soft, innocent looking, and his black hair was falling around his face in a way that made it look like he didn't really care about how it looked. He mumbled something, so quiet I almost didn't catch it. "Sorry." I blinked, still thrown off by how quickly he'd managed to take up my whole focus. I didn't even register what was happening until he was already stepping around me and walking away, like he had places to be. I stood there, my mouth slightly open, watching him disappear down the hall. "Yo, Lucas, you coming?" Someone from the team called out to me. "Yeah," I muttered, still staring after Liam, not entirely sure what had just happened. There was something about him, something that lingered in the air even after he was gone. It was like I could still feel the space he'd left behind. I shook my head, trying to push the feeling away. "Pull it together, man," I muttered to myself. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going to forget those eyes anytime soon. An hour later, I was zoning out in Spanish class, the teacher rambling on about verbs and conjugations. I barely noticed when she clapped her hands together to get everyone's attention. "Class," she announced, "we have a new student joining us today. Please welcome Liam Carter." I looked up, my heart skipping a beat when I saw him. It was the guy from the hallway, standing at the front of the room with his hands shoved in his pockets. His black hair was still messy, and he had that same look in his golden brown eyes, quiet, maybe a little awkward, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Liam, take the empty seat next to Lucas." the teacher said, pointing toward me. I straightened up, feeling my heartbeat quicken. Liam glanced at me, and for a split second, I caught his eye. Then, just like that, he ducked his head and walked toward the desk beside mine. When he sat down, he didn't look at me, just pulled out a notebook and started doodling in it, like no one else existed. I tried to focus on the lesson, but my eyes kept drifting to him. Liam was so different from the rest of us. While everyone else was passing notes or slouching in their seats, he sat straight up, head bent low over his notebook. I could see little sketches taking shape on the pageantries, animals, stuff like that. And they were really good, way better than anything I could do. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't seem nervous. He just sat there quietly, calm, like he didn't care whether anyone noticed him. But I noticed him. I noticed him more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the way he looked, although, yeah, he was ridiculously good looking. It was the way he carried himself, like he had his own world going on inside his head and didn't need anyone else in it. And for some reason, that made me want to try and figure him out. About 2 months later, I already knew I was going to fail the Spanish test before Mrs. Ramirez even handed it back. But when she slid my paper onto my desk, the look she gave me was enough to confirm it. "Senior Lucas," she said, her voice sharp, "you've done it again." A few kids snickered, and I slouched in my seat, my face burning with embarrassment. Mrs. Ramirez gave me a glare that could cut glass, then turned to Liam, who was sitting behind me. "Liam," she said, "since you're our top student, would you be willing to tutor Lucas after school?" My head whipped around so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. Liam blinked, looking startled. But then he nodded, his voice quiet as always. "I can do that." "Perfect," Mrs. Ramirez said, like she just solved a world crisis. "Maybe some of your brilliance will rub off on him." The bell rang, and as everyone filtered out of the room, I barely waited before I turned to Liam, trying to sound casual despite how fast my heart was beating. "Thanks for helping me out," I said, smiling awkwardly. Liam glanced up from his bag, his golden brown eyes meeting mine for a brief second before he nodded. "No problem." "No problem," I repeated, grinning like an idiot. This is a huge deal for me. Liam just shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. But for me, it was. I had an excuse to spend more time with him, just the two of us. I couldn't think of anything that made failing more worth it than this. I arrived at the library right on time, my nerves practically buzzing with anticipation. I'd never been one to get all worked up over tutoring sessions, but this one felt different. There was something about Liam that had been messing with my head ever since I first saw him. It wasn't just the fact that he was insanely talented in almost everything, or that he had this effortless coolness about him. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. When I walked in, Liam was already sitting at one of the long tables in the back, flipping through a Spanish textbook with a focused expression. I couldn't help but notice how comfortable he looked there. He had that same quiet confidence that seemed to surround him, making him appear like he was completely in control of the situation, even when I wasn't. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the nervousness. "Hey." Liam looked up from his book, his golden brown eyes flicking to me. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, and he nodded toward the seat across from him. "Hey, Lucas, you're right on time." I dragged my chair out, the sound of it scraping on the floor a bit louder than I expected. Sitting down, I could feel my palms getting a little sweaty, but I tried to ignore it. We weren't here for awkward small talk after all. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "how does this whole tutoring thing work? You're the expert here." Liam chuckled softly. "I'm hardly an expert, but I know how to help people understand things. We'll start by reviewing your notes, then go over what you're struggling with." I nodded, pulling out my own notebook and spreading it out on the table. "Sounds good." Liam didn't waste any time. He opened his textbook to a specific page, then pointed to a section on the grammar rules that had been giving me a headache for weeks. I followed his finger with my eyes, trying to make sense of the terms and conjugations. He spoke slowly, carefully explaining the material in a way that somehow made it feel less intimidating. But as we went on, I realized it wasn't just his teaching style that was drawing me in. It was how he looked at me when he spoke, like he genuinely cared whether I understood. His attention never wavered. His eyes, warm and focused, stayed on me with an intensity that made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered in that moment. I cleared my throat and tried to shake off the thought. This wasn't a date. This wasn't some romantic thing. It was just a tutoring session, right? I felt my face heat up when I realized I'd been staring at him for a little too long. Sorry, I'm getting it now. Liam blinked, then gave a soft smile. Good. I think you're finally starting to understand it. Just keep practicing. I tried to focus on the lesson, but my mind kept wandering back to the way his voice sounded when he spoke to me, calm and patient. It was like nothing could rattle him. I couldn't remember the last time someone had treated me with that kind of genuine patience. I glanced up at him again, and this time he caught my eye, raising an eyebrow slightly, like he was wondering what I was thinking. But instead of saying anything, I just shook my head and went back to the notes in front of me. I needed to stop overthinking everything. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Liam and I met for tutoring after school every Wednesday and Friday, and I had to admit, I was learning a lot. Spanish was still hard, but with him guiding me, it felt more like a challenge than a chore. We spent hours together, sometimes talking about the lessons, sometimes just chatting about random stuff. Liam wasn't as quiet as I first thought. Once he opened up, he was surprisingly funny, and he had this dry wit that I hadn't expected. His sense of humor was subtle, but I found myself laughing at things that probably weren't even that funny, just because his delivery was perfect. The more time we spent together, the more I started to notice the little things about him, the way he would tap his fingers against the desk when he was thinking, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about art or his favorite books, how he always tried to make me laugh when he could tell I was frustrated. And the more I learned about him, the more I realized I didn't just want to be friends with him. It was late, on a Friday afternoon, when I finally admitted it to myself. I was sitting in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few tutoring sessions in my head. There had been moments, subtle moments, where it almost felt like Liam was testing the waters. A lingering glance, a small joke that seemed to mean more than it let on. But every time I caught myself thinking about him that way, I'd shake my head, telling myself to focus, to just keep it casual. After all, he was my tutor. I couldn't let myself get distracted by anything else. Still, I couldn't help it. Every time we spent time together, I found myself more and more drawn to him. The next day, when I met him for tutoring again, I had to fight to push those thoughts aside. I couldn't let myself get lost in them. Not yet. "Hey, Lucas," Liam said, his voice pulling me back to the present. We were sitting at the usual table in the library, going over the upcoming Spanish test. He looked up from his notes, his golden brown eyes scanning my face. "You're quieter than usual today. Everything okay?" I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess. Long day." Liam studied me for a second before nodding. "All right. Well, if you need a break, let me know. We don't have to push it too hard today." I gave him a grateful smile. "Thanks, Liam." For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and I felt that strange, familiar pull. It was like the whole world slowed down just for a second, as if the only thing that mattered was that look between us. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed, and we both went back to the lesson like nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew it had, and I knew that, at some point, I'd have to figure out what all of this meant, what Liam and I meant. But for now, I was content just being in the same room as him,